reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So, hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Phantoms Monsters Personal Reports, where I narrate and discuss some of the cryptid and unexplained sightings and encounters submitted to Phantoms and Monsters and to the Phantoms and Monsters Fortean Research team. Thanks for joining me. Now, Phantoms and Monsters radio channel is made possible by you clicking the subscribe button and by you sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are always appreciated. And I do have the Buy Me a Coffee link down below. So thanks for your consideration. So if you are in the chat, do me a favor and hold your question. Hold posting your question until after I'm done with the last presentation. I'll give you a little bit of a heads up when I start that one up. So and also post it in all caps so I can see it. Much appreciated. So tonight, the first account was something I received back in May of 2012. It was forwarded by a guy by the name of John. He was a retired federal employee who lives in northern Nevada and who wished to remain anonymous. Now, the story centers around an experience he had while living with his grandfather. And this property where they lived on was in Aleppo Township in Greene County, Pennsylvania. So it's right in the southwest corner of the state. But it's an area that's had a lot of activity. Now, he didn't want to pinpoint the location, but did say he wanted me to dedicate this to his grandfather, Samuel Hill, who he still considers the most remarkable man he's ever known. Now, John seemed very sincere in my opinion. He decided to come forth with the account after he had a rather strange encounter a few months previous to that, which he really didn't want to discuss. So he did mention in the one email that he was 81 years old, and I don't know. I don't know if John's still around or not, but and he's a veteran of the Korean War. He also stated that he truly felt that his grandfather's actions were taken in defense of the family. So he states, when he was a boy, my mother and I lived with my grandfather, who had a farmhouse in a rural location in southwest Pennsylvania. My grandfather was a handyman who also worked a small blacksmith shop in his old barn. Now, my grandmother had died before I was born, and my father had also passed away while serving overseas in the U.S. Army. Now, beginning in the summer of 1946, we noticed strange howling sounds coming from the woods that surrounded the property. Now, the activity came at night and was very frightening when the howling came close. The sounds didn't seem to bother my grandfather, though my mother and I were shaken when it would begin. Now, the sounds continued off and on for about a year, but we never noticed any animals. And my grandfather and I would hunt for deer and squirrel in the woods during the colder months, but we never saw signs of an unusual animal activity. So one late afternoon in spring of 1947, I was helping my grandfather in his shop when I noticed something moving around the edge of the woods near an area where my grandfather had a few junk cars and other items. It was about 200 feet from our location, but I clearly noticed something or someone moving about. I told my grandfather to look. He walked to the door, lit his pipe, and said nothing. Now, after a minute or two, he turned around and got back to work. Now, about that time, this thing moved into the woods and disappeared. Now, I couldn't judge how big it was, but it was sort of reminded me of a magazine picture I had seen of a large ape that was said to inhabit the ancient jungles. Now, later that evening, I told my mother what I had seen. She was shocked because she knew I wouldn't lie to her and that the howling sounds had been closer lately. Also told her my grandfather's response when I pointed the creature out to him. Now, she immediately stood up and walked into the sitting room in order to ask my grandfather what it was. He started to shake his head and slowly said, and said that he was hoping that we wouldn't see it because he was worried we would be scared and leave him. After assuring him that we'd never leave him, my mother again insisted that he tell us what the creature was. He looked away, took a deep breath, and said, "It's a dark walker," and said it lived in the woods for many years. He said the native Indians called it stone spirit, and they thought that it was an evil spirit who would appear when someone was about to die. Now, the last time he had seen the dark walker was the night before my grandmother had passed. My mother was skeptical of the harbinger of death angle, but she sensed that there was something unnatural nearby. Now, the howling continued each night, though we hadn't seen any signs of this dark walker. Now, one warm evening, we were sitting on the back porch. There were a few howls, but it seemed like the sounds were further away. We were listening to the radio when all at once my grandfather stood up and looked out towards the barn. He turned to me and said, "John, go get my pistol and ammo. Hurry now." I ran into the sitting room and grabbed the .455 Weebly revolver and a handful of bullets from the old steamer trunk. I handed it to him and watched him load the gun. He then picked up a hatchet and slid it in his pants belt. "Now, both of you get in the house now." We were in the kitchen looking through the screen door and watched my grandfather walk slowly towards the barn. We saw him turn and walk out of sight into the dark. I decided to go grab my shotgun and keep it nearby. And after a minute or so, we heard 3 gunshots and a blood-curdling scream emanate from the woods near the barn. We were frozen and wondering if we should go look for my grandfather. A few seconds later, we heard him yell, "Stay in the house until I come back." I heard the pickup truck start up. I looked out the storage room window and saw my grandfather drive to the back of the barn and park. Several minutes later, he backed up and drove by the side of the house out onto the road. I could see that there was something in the back covered up with a tarp. And I was getting late, so my mother told me to go to bed. Now, the next morning, I came downstairs and sat beside my grandfather, who was reading the newspaper and drinking a cup of coffee. And my mother was sitting at the other end of the table, staring at my grandfather. Not long later, she said, "Well, Dad, tell me. Tell him." Excuse me, she said, "Well, Dad, tell him." My grandfather put the paper down and looked at me. "I killed the dark walker." That was all he said. My mother told me not to tell anyone, and the matter was closed. Now, we never talked about it again. My grandfather lived another 15 years, and my mother stayed with him until his dying day. And when I grew older, I moved away and raised a family. I would return home to visit each summer and never heard another howl. Now, I asked John if he thought the dark walker was a Bigfoot or some hairy hominid. He responded by saying that he wasn't sure. He thought it seemed more animal than human, and that it moved lower to the ground at least during a brief time, he observed it. And John mentioned that there were Shawnee legends of similar creatures, but he never found a reference to a stone spirit. So quite frankly, I actually looked into this stone spirit Shawnee legend, and it is a true account. It's something that they did consider in what they possibly called Bigfoot stone spirits. Rosemary Ellen Golly put this in one of her books, her book in particular about Greene County. And she did look into the stone spirit story, and apparently it was something that it was part of their religion, part of their legend. So, there's not a whole lot out there about it, but it does show up occasionally. Okay. This next account was one I found on the internet by someone who the person who had it on the internet, someone I trust, somebody I look up to. So when he posted, I went ahead and reposted on the blog and looked into it a little further. A man named Anthony Cross wrote about the time Bigfoot saved him from certain death. Now, the incident occurred in the Florida Everglades after the witness had sustained a severe injury. Now, he states, in 1982, I just ended my time in the Army. And after getting home, I found nothing had changed. That, in my experiences in the service, left me in a poor mental state. I love the outdoors, camping, especially camping from an early age. So I foolishly decided that camping in the Florida Everglades would give me the peace of mind I desperately needed. But after 3 days, I had had enough. I packed up my gear and headed out, only to realize that I had somewhat gotten myself lost. There were about 7 hours of daylight left, so I climbed the tallest tree and I saw, to try to get my bearings. The tree was pretty thin, and just as I saw the way I needed to go, I slipped down and fell about 16 feet. My ankle and my knee were sprained very badly, and the pain was nearly unbearable. I limped as far as possible in the direction I needed to go, but soon I couldn't stand the pain anymore. Now, finding the path leading out, I sat and started scooting backward as best I could. It was hard going on the path, which was made of crushed shells and gravel. About an hour later, I saw a large cat come out of the bush. I slowly started towards me, much like a house cat does when it sees a bird, feeling very vulnerable and unarmed. I knew I was in deep trouble. Each time I scooted backward, it would lunge and sort of flop its front paws. Craziest thing I'd ever saw. It was about 10 yards from me when from the right came a rock about the size of a softball flying horizontal like a missile. It struck the side of the cat's head so hard that aside from literally exploding, it folded around backward and slapped its body. I heard the crunch and saw the blood and mist on impact. I swear every single word is absolutely true. I looked to the right and saw it standing there just inside the tree line. Massive dark hair covered except his face. It was dark, but easily human-like. We made eye contact, and I felt very calm. Now, to this day, I can't be sure if I heard or just felt safe, but I heard that word inside my head. I looked back at the cat. I thought it made a gurgling sound. I still don't know, but when I turned my back, my savior was gone. Now, I was replaying everything in my mind when I heard a crack at 5 o'clock. As I turned towards the sound, a long, thin stick came flying out of the trees, landing a few feet behind me. I never saw it or heard it after the first moment, but I was positive it threw me a crutch to help me get to my feet and make it out. Now, over the years, I had the experience to myself alone knowing I'd be locked up if I told anyone. There are bad apples in every species, but people need to understand they have compassion for us unless attacked. So I thought that was quite an interesting story. Every once in a while, we will come across a story where the a Bigfoot will reach out and help someone who's in distress. I had another one not long ago that I posted. I might post it next week. So this account I've had for a bit. I decided to dust it off and bring it up. A Muskegon, Michigan woman relates her encounters with possible men in black after several UFO sightings along Lake Michigan. Now, these MIB also used an unknown piece of equipment during the investigation. Now, I received this back in 2014, and I know it didn't happen much before that. So she states, "Hi, Phantoms and Monsters. I found your blog while hunting for information on UFO investigations. A co-worker told me that some UFO investigators may be alien beings hired by government and military. Is this true? I asked because something happened to me in early May 2014 that I cannot explain. Now, I live near Muskegon, Michigan, close to Lake Michigan shoreline. Over the past 2 years, several neighbors and ourselves have witnessed many weird lights above the lake. During the last week of April, there were several strings of red and white lights moving north above the lake. I noticed the lights twice on different nights. Now, the man across the street contacted a UFO group. I don't know the name of the group. He told my son that he had also seen unusual people in his backyard from his bedroom window late one night. Now, he went out to confront them. They were gone. This happened just 2 days after he filed a UFO report online. Now, on 2 consecutive nights, my son and I saw spotlights shining from the shore of the lake. There was a field, a narrow road, and a berm between our house and the lake. It looked like the spotlights may have been mounted on vehicles. Now, on both nights, this occurred around 11 p.m. and lasted only for a few minutes. So a few days later, May 4th, about 2 p.m., I was out in the backyard working in my garden. A man dressed in black military garb had entered through my back gate and walked towards me. I stopped what I was doing and waited for him to say something. He wore glasses that were tinted yellow, which stood out because everything else on him was black. He also wore a plain black cap with no insignia. And when he got close, he looked directly at me without any expression and asked if I had noticed lights over the lake. Now, I explained what we had seen and other information I thought would help. He wrote everything down in a small notebook, rarely saying a word other than anything else. Now, when I finished, he asked if I had reported the sightings. I told him the man across the street said he contacted the UFO group. Then asked, "But did you contact anyone?" I said, "No." Then I asked him what group he was with. He just looked at me and said, "Thank you for cooperating." That was very weird because I felt that there was something not right about this man. I guess it was intuition, but I was creeped out. So on Saturday, May 9th, around 10:30 p.m., there were more lights coming from the lake shoreline. Now, this time I decided to walk over and see what was going on. My son, who was 17, came with me. He was just as curious as me. We walked through the yard, across the field, then over the berm to the shoreline. There were 5 black Land Rover-like vehicles about 100 yards south along the shoreline. There were also a dozen or more men in black garb moving about. Now, as soon as one of these men noticed us, he shouted, "There," and came running towards us. He had a 3-foot-long, light-colored baton with a yellow light on the end. 2 other men came running towards us as well. The man with the baton yelled, "You must leave at once. This is a national security operation." My son asked who they were, but never received an answer to the question. One of the other men, who I believe was a superior, said, "You must leave the area immediately, go back to your home. A representative will contact you in a day or two." We agreed and promptly left and went home. I have not been contacted by anyone since that night. My son and I went back to the shoreline and looked around, hoping that we could find something that could help us understand what had happened, but there was nothing. I believe that they may have discovered something of importance just by the way they reacted to us. Is there any way of finding out who these guys were and what they were doing? Now, I contacted the witness by email, explaining that this type of activity isn't uncommon after specific sightings, especially those sightings that occurred several times. Now, I guess you'd call it an MIB scenario. I guess that's what they were. The baton with the light, though, is interesting. That was the first time I had heard any piece of equipment being present during an encounter in an investigation. So after many years, I still haven't received any further information pertaining to this incident. Now, this other account came from a woman who wrote to me and said, "I believe my husband and I saw a hellhound." She states, "We live in rural northern Idaho and we both hunt, so we know everything about animals, even in pitch darkness. We don't have normal plumbing. We have to turn on an electric well every morning to fill it up. Our tank can last us 3 to 4 days, but we like to keep it filled just in case. There are other tanks like that scattered throughout the woods, just waiting for someone to buy the land and build a home." Now, we were taking a walk and it got dark, so we went back home. However, on our way home, we saw something, not human or animal, near one of the wells. It was hunched over like it was eating. We walked carefully closer, about 20 feet from this thing, trying to figure out what it was. It was too large for a stray dog or wolf and too small for a bear. But whatever it was, it looked at us with red eyes. I've never been more scared in my life. Now, my husband is scared of nothing, but he was scared as well. We took off running. I don't think we've ever run that fast before. It did chase us for a bit, then it just disappeared. We got to our house and it was just gone. Now, we knew it was behind us when we left the woods, but we couldn't see it. We locked all the windows and doors that night. We talked to one of the town locals about this thing we saw. He showed us a picture of a hellhound. He told us stories about people meeting the hellhound in the same area, always near a well, road, crossroads of places of death. Seeing him once will bring us happiness, seeing it twice will bring us sorrow, and seeing it 3 times will bring us death. I don't know what it was, but hellhound's the only explanation. These hellhound stories are pretty interesting. I do get one once in a while. Mostly, very few here in the United States, but we do get them. So let's see here. Now, this is this next account's the last one. So if you want to start posting questions, I'll keep an eye out for them. The witness writes, after 30 long years, a Tennessee man, and this came from secondhand source. After 30 long years, a Tennessee man had finally revealed the reason behind his abrupt decision to stop going into the woods. The man, who had chosen to remain anonymous, had kept his secret hidden for decades, but recent events have prompted him to speak out about the harrowing experience that led to his avoidance of the Tennessee wilderness. The tale he tells is one of fear, survival, and the brush with unknown that changed his life forever. Now, on this particular day, he packed light and only hiked a couple miles into the Smokies. He set up camp and spent a perfect day exploring the area with his faithful canine companions. As late afternoon arrived, the man was ready to settle down and start a fire to warm up, at the campsite. However, he noticed that his 2 dogs seemed unusually agitated, barking and growling at something in the distance. Even though he had always managed to keep bears away before, they had always managed to keep bears away before, the man couldn't help by feeling a bit concerned. Now, as night began to fall, the warm summer air enveloped the campsite, prompting the man to leave the tent door open. He settled in for the night with his two dogs nestled close to him. He woke too soon, seeing bright moonlight illuminating his camp before he realized the dogs were making deep, low growls and had hackles raised at something. He then noticed another noise like a thrumming groan coming from outside the tent. Now, the source of the groaning noise became apparent as the man's eyes adjusted to the darkness. He could now see a dark outline that seemed to roughly form the shape of a bear, lurking just beyond the now cold embers of the campfire. The man shouted at the dark looming figure outside the tent. To his surprise, the creature went quiet, but then began to grow in size until it was towering over the screen window in the tent. The tent roof. There was a screen on top of the tent, so it was looking down onto the tent. The man could hardly believe what he was seeing. He had never encountered anything so massive outside of a zoo. Meanwhile, his two dogs continued to growl, their instincts telling them that this creature was not to be trusted. He could hear the creature inhale a long, slow breath before letting out a trumpeting call. It sounded like the mixture of a lion's roar and a human shout. The dogs were terrified into silence, and the creature bolted away. He was helpless to stop his canine companions from giving chase to the creature, as they ignored his commands in favor of the hunt. So without a second thought, he grabbed his rifle and headlight and ran after them. He could hear the barking in the distance, but they were moving too fast for him to keep up. Then he heard something that sent chills down his spine, a maniacal laughing sound like that of a hyena, coming from the same direction as the dogs. Despite his growing sense of dread, the man continued to follow the sounds of barking and laughter, hoping against hope that he would find his dogs safe and sound. But as the night wore on and the barks faded into silence, he realized he had to return to camp or risk becoming lost himself. He stayed up all night waiting for the dogs to return to camp, calling for them occasionally, but to no avail. As soon as the sun came up, he searched for his beloved pets again. After hours of searching, he finally stumbled upon them. One was badly injured and whimpering from within the thicket of bushes, and the other was just literally torn to pieces. The loss of his dog's life hit him hard, and the surviving canine was never the same again, becoming fearful of both night and the woods. The man knows he had encountered something terrifying in the woods that night, far worse than any bear or any other known predator. To this day, he has never been able to fully explain what he saw or heard that fateful night, but he is certain that it was an encounter with an unknown creature that made him give up exploring the wilds of Tennessee forever. So, folks, if you got any questions, post them, and I will try to answer them for you. Bernadette wants to know, where are the hellhounds most often seen? Most of the sightings that I have gotten over the years are over in the British Isles, in Ireland and in Great Britain. Well, in England and Scotland. Occasionally we'll get one in Wales, but no, that's the area where most of the sightings are. And that area is kind of indicative of that. There are certain areas in England, especially Cannock Chase, which is very well known for cryptid canines and these hellhounds. So, but that's where I get most of the sightings at. CS asks, when did the MIB first start appearing in the U.S.? It's hard to tell. John Keel had written about them in relation to the Mothman sightings, after the Mothman sighting, after the bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, that these men in black were showing up asking questions of people living in and around Point Pleasant. I don't know if there are any references to them before that. There have been references to them a little after that, but it has steadily increased as years have gone by. But I'd say most of the sighting, the time period where they mostly started showing up, to the degree they are now, I guess maybe the mid 90s. I really don't remember, or have an idea when they exactly started. Marla Snyder, do you have many reports of a cryptid helping a human? Occasionally we get one. It's mostly Bigfoot. It's always Bigfoot. I mean, I don't know of any other cryptid that has helped or a human or had a story, but Bigfoot seemed to be the ones. There have been a lot of accounts of hikers getting lost or people getting injured, and they show up and end up someplace in the company of a group of Bigfoot who are trying to nurse them or trying to feed them or trying to hide them for whatever reason. There's some pretty well-known accounts as well, so, and older accounts, but more recently there have been accounts of children who would get lost in the woods, and I don't know if they're connected to any of the missing 411 cases, but there have been several search and rescue folks who mentioned that they'd go looking for a child, and they'd find it in an area where there's just no way in hell the kid could have got there, like up in a mountain, up on a cliff or something. And when the child they would ask the child about it, the answer seemed to be that of a Bigfoot. So, but it does happen. Okay. D-Apocalypse 22. Are hellhounds generally more aggressive than rogue dogman? From all indications that I have gotten with the hellhounds is that they're distinctly supernatural. Many times the apparition will show up as an apparition, not fully formed. Many times people talk about it having fire associated with it, having a real awful smell associated with it, and always quadruped. Are they associated with death? I don't know. They may very well be. But I have had, like I said, that last account I talked about, and there was a particular one down in North Carolina that was very interesting that I knew as well, of a possible hellhound that had come out of a cemetery and crossed the road in front of somebody who was driving by the cemetery. And they described it as being like a huge apparition of a large dog, large black dog, but it could see flames on its feet and across its back to some degree. Logan L., have you looked into BEK being possibly hybrid shapeshifter reptilian? Yeah, I mean, my theory on this phenomenon is that they are alien. I don't think they're human. I don't think they're associated with any organization or anybody or any humans. I've called them the cleanup crew because they seem to show up after sightings very quickly, many times before it's even reported, and give off that vibe that they just aren't human. And many times they have like an olive-colored skin, if you can see it, strange mannerism, very mechanical. very monotone as far as voice goes. Usually pretty polite, but they can get quite aggressive, trying to convince the witness not to say anything or to do anything. But no, we hear that a lot. But are they shapeshifters? I don't know. I mean, I think they are an alien species of some type. World Bigfoot Radio. Howdy, Lon. Howdy back. Sue G, have you ever heard any reports of howls that sound kind of mechanical? Yeah, I have. Mostly to do with distant howls. Nothing in particularly very close by. But there have been occasions. Now, what that is, I don't know. Could it be some type of alien being? I guess. I mean, after all these years, I've heard all kinds of weird stuff. So, but there have been occasions where the mechanical sounding or metallic sounding the sound show up. Not necessarily anything that was seen that was like a drone or some type of robotic creature or something. But yeah, we have had cases of sounds that sound metallic. Okay. Well, thanks, folks. Thanks for joining me this evening. If you have an unexplained encounter and our sighting, feel free to contact me through the Phantoms Monster blog site. And thanks to each and all of you for watching and chatting. Please like, subscribe, and share. It's always great to have you all come in here. Piper's a new member. Thanks for joining. Now, if you do have a sighting or encounter report and you'd like to have it considered for this show or for the Phantoms Monster blog or both, feel free to forward to my email at Lon Strickler at phantomsandmonsters.com. Now, my phone number can be found at the website, phantomsandmonsters.com. So until we meet again, stay healthy, have a safe, enjoyable weekend. Good night.